action. Hello, welcome back to Show and Tell. I'm Billy and I'm your host. This is a weekly podcast, usually about vintage knitting. And if you've been with me in the past, you're probably aware of the 1940s Fair Isle sweater that I've been working on for 4.5 months. I think we're closing in on 4.5 months. I am just finishing up now. Later in this episode, I'm going to back up and show you how I cut the steeks. But there were a couple of things that I also wanted to show you about this. It's a very rare project when I don't have to rip back and redo. With this, you really don't want to ever have to redo any of it because it's so very time consuming and the stitches are so tiny. I did have one row where I neglected to change the color. It wasn't terribly visible. I think I tried to show it to you before. Yeah, I think it's this row right here. You're not going to see that I skipped doing a row of green at the very top before I transitioned into that lilac color. I wasn't so worried about that, but when I was further up and I had skipped a color, I thought that's going to be too noticeable. So I tinked back. I had 2 rounds that I had to tink back. Each round had several hundred stitches. I don't remember the exact count at that point. So it took me quite a bit of time to undo each stitch. But I wanted to demonstrate for you why I tinked back as opposed to just ripping out the needle and then pulling back and picking up those stitches. So let me just show you. This is a size 1 needle, and I have 10 little stitches on here. If I pull this needle out, I think you can see, even though my camera's not that fabulous, I think you can see how tiny these stitches are. I probably could, especially if I put on magnifying glasses, I probably could go back through and pick these up. I can, you know, but this is a very small sampler. If you had hundreds of these and you drop 1 stitch, it's easily going to run down and then you're having a real nightmare. And I just wasn't into that. I didn't want to even entertain the possibility of that happening. I did want to demonstrate, if you were on a larger needle, that you might choose to do that in a different way. So here's something else that I'm working on. I have no problem pulling these stitches out. Okay, so these stitches are now off, but look at the size of those stitches. These are not easily going to run down. They sure could, but they're certainly large enough that I can see them. The length of the yarn going around that loop is just longer than the length of the yarn going around this loop. So I have more surface area to catch. And there's also more surface area that would have had to pull through the loop below it. So when stitches are larger like this, it's a pretty simple thing to just line them up and pass your needle right back through. So I wanted to demonstrate that and show the difference between, you know, losing stitches on a larger needle versus a smaller needle, and trying to explain why I actually tink back instead of just ripping out those stitches. In some of the videos that I'm about to show you, I mentioned Fray check, and I was glad that Nancy suggested that I purchase this for Jeannie, because you'll see I used it when I steeped, but I also was recalling when I purchased the fabric to make this sweater that it was suggested that at the edges, and you can see I have like a little bit of fraying, well, you might not be able to see. I have a little bit of fraying at the ends of some of these. There's, I think, 3 or 4 rows of ruffles, 1, 2, 3 here, and a bunch of rows here. And at the end of each one, you have to cut the fabric and go on to the next one. So I had heard that using Fray check on the edges of those would keep this from fraying out over time. So I just wanted to mention that. Also, I wanted to just briefly touch on what I promised in the last video to discuss with you, and that is trying to calculate how much yarn I'm going to need for my next project. I have done this successfully before, creating a spreadsheet to show how many stitches I have on each row and which colors, how many stitches of each color, and then a running total. With the Harlequin, which is my collaboration with Roxanne Richardson, there are triangles, sets of these pairs of triangles that go all the way down the front and the back and down the sleeves. So there's a background color and two contrasting colors. And here I've tried to calculate how many stitches in each row each of those colors will be, and I'm keeping a tally, which, because I don't have the yarn, I don't know exactly how many stitches I'm going to get per yard, but at least I'll know that I have, like you can see here, I've tabulated that in one color I have 2,400, another color I have 2,400, and in the main color I have 25,000. So it's more than 10 times the amount so of the main color. So if I had, for example, one ball of turquoise, one ball of light blue, that's two. I would need 10 balls of my main color. In all likelihood, I'm going to need more than one ball of each of the contrasting colors, because there's quite a bit of it, and because it's going down both sleeves and so forth. So I'm figuring that probably 11 or 12 balls total, and if I'm using 2 for color A, 2 for color B, I probably can't get away with less than 8 or 9 balls of the other color. So I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb and order my yarn, hoping that that will be enough. I might order an extra ball of the main color just in case, because the pattern calls for elbow length sleeves, and I'm going to do full length sleeve, and I'm also going to make it not ribbing at the waist, but I'm going to make it a little bit longer. So I sort of know the ballpark I'm in, and I know that I have to order significantly more of the main color, which some of you are probably laughing and saying, yeah, you probably could have guessed anyway. But this is a good exercise to go through in general, because it's getting me more familiar with the pattern. Okay, I'm going to show you these two little clips, and I'll say goodbye now. I'll see you on the next go round. If you want, stick around at the end of those clips for another pearl of wisdom. See you next time.
After my very first experience cutting open one sleeve wasn't as successful as I had hoped, I decided to proceed to my other two steeks that I have yet to do. And I thought I would show you my new strategies, which I hope will be an improvement. So I haven't finished, but here you can see I started down here. I secured this end. This is the steek for the neck. It's going to be a V-neck sweater. So I started to kind of loop through a stitch of one color and half of a stitch of one color and half of a stitch of another color that are side by side. And I went all the way up. Then I started on the other side of the central stitch. This particular steek only calls for 8 stitches. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I've been trying to go through the one right next to the center and the one next to it. looping around. So you can see I have 2 columns, and eventually I will be cutting from here on up. But my strategy for my first steek was to pick up the stitches around the armhole. So I wanted to show you on the other armhole how I'm doing that. Before I make this cut, and here too, I've only done 1 column, that's the hot pink. But before I cut through this, I'm going to pick up stitches all the way around the armhole. And I'll show you how I'm doing that. Right here, these stitches were the stitches that were put onto waste yarn as the underarm portion, like in any other sweater. And so those were easy to load onto my double pointed needle. But now I'm going to pick up and knit where I want my ribbing to emanate from. So I could just go right along the edge. I could just go right along here, but because of the stitches that were decreased, I think it might look a little bit uneven. So I'm trying to stay, at least for now, just outside of that. And eventually, when I get up into this zone, it will be just straight along that last steek. Now in this pattern, you can see that line. It will be a vertical line when you're holding the sweater upright. Here I'm holding it horizontal because I am going to pick up the stitches in this direction. So let me show you how I do that. So I want to have my hand inside. I want to be able to feel where I'm going. I also want to be able to see where I'm going. And I'm going to pick up, just like you would any other armhole, I'm going to pick up 2 and then pull it through. So that's 1 stitch picked up. And then I'll look for the next little V to pick up both legs. And grab that. Whoops. Now, because it's telling me a certain number of stitches around the armhole, I know that I can't pick up a stitch from every single row. I have to skip occasionally, space it out. So there's a bigger space in here than there are here. I probably did skip over 1 little row in there, but that's going to work out just fine. And when I get up to the top, when I go all the way up to the top, I'll just count and see how many stitches I have. If I have too many, I'm not going to worry because I can decrease when I do my first round of knitting. So I'm going to go all the way up to here. Here's the opening where I'll be cutting down. And I'm going to continue right around picking up the stitches until I'm all the way back to here, and then I'll knit my ribbing. Here's my other armhole where I have completed the ribbing. I bound off at first loosely, and then I found it was creating a sort of ruffle effect. So I started to bind off a little bit tighter, which is counterintuitive. Usually we want to bind off loosely to have the stretch, but here I think because it is so airy and loose, it really wasn't necessary. I have already closed up my shoulders from the front to the back using a 3-needle bind off. It made a beautiful shoulder seam. I hope that you're able to see that. Very smooth. And I'm still holding the stitches. These are the stitches for the back of the neck. I clipped them on with one of these clamps that I get off of my dead orchids. And I can slide these up and down if I need to get the needle out of my way, but this is on the same size needle, so I'm already loaded on. When it's time for me to pick these stitches up onto my circulars, I'll be able to just knit right off of here onto the circs. After the last session, I continued to work on my second armhole, and I believe it's prepared for steeking again. This time I tried 2 different techniques since last time it seemed like I had an epic fail. On this side, point to this, I just whip stitched in between 2 stitches of different colors. So if this is my V and then I have another V next to it, I took this stitch and this stitch, 2 different colors, and I whip stitched around those 2. I'm hoping that that's a good way of securing, but just in case, on this side, I used a crochet hook and I did a chain stitch into, again, the 2 stitches of different colors. So let me see if I get this close to the camera, if you get a better view of all the things that are going on here. So those 2 pink vertical lines are what I'm going to attempt to cut between. And you'll notice I have my fray check close at hand, just in case I see that it's failing. I made a particular point of securing both of these ends so that it won't start to unravel at the cast on edge. Okay, wish me luck, fingers and toes crossed. Here we go, steek number 2 of 3. Now I'm gonna have to pull this apart a little bit because I want to get right in between those, and I don't want to cut into the pink at all. So I want to have a look on the inside, and I think I'm good to go. Let's see. Okay, that's my first snip. I think this time my pink stitches are well out of the way. Looks pretty good so far. I'm still going to use the fray check. That makes me nervous. But let me proceed with my cutting, and I'll come back and do that later on. Oh, it is nerve-wracking. I'm a little more confident this time than I was last time. I will say that. Mainly because I know that fray check is there. I'm not sure what's happening here with that pink. Hope that doesn't undo everything. Let's see how we're coming along here. Well, that doesn't look good. It would like to be inside somehow. Let me reach in for my other armhole. Okay, so now I have my hand underneath, at least to make sure I'm not cutting through anything important. Oh, Okay, about halfway. Oh, I forgot to mention, let me stop here and tell you, I had already done the ribbing around this armhole. So my backup is this row where I picked up my stitches, I think would prevent everything from unraveling past there. At the very worst, I mean, it would have to unravel 4 columns of stitches to get to that pickup row. Okay, moving right along. I'm staying in between these 2 pink columns. I'm getting there, slowly but surely. I do have things hanging inside, I think color changes that haven't been woven in yet. I hope I'm not snipping off anything critical. Wow. I give a lot of credit to people who do Fair Isle all the time with Steeks. I don't know that I would rush to do this again, certainly not on a size 1 needle with 46 stitches to 4 inches, as you've heard me say ad nauseum. It's my badge of courage now. Another feather in a shaky cap. Okay, almost there. Those extra little things were floats from behind. Okay, mission accomplished. I am open second armhole. These are all color changes that will need to be woven in. Oh, and this one little stitch there. Oh, another one. Those are my floats. Okay, now I'm totally open all the way up and down. Okay. I'll do the fray check later. But while I'm here, I wanted to also show you my preparation for the third Steek. I don't think I'm going to be able to do all the ribbing around the neckline because the neckline has a rather unusual shape, sort of like a trapezoid shape. It doesn't come to a V, it's truncated at the bottom. So I did start to pick up stitches. Let me get to the bottom of this. Okay, so this group of stitches were put on hold when I created the Steek and I had to cast these stitches on. So those were on a scrap yarn. But then I started here picking up all along the edge of where the Steek will be. And I went up and around the back of the neck stitches. Those were also on hold. You might remember seeing a straight needle holding those. And now I'm coming down the other side of the Steek. It seems like it's a little bit different than this side, and they should be absolutely symmetrical. So I might have to tinker around there to get that right. And then I will come down all the way to meet this, and I'll have a big oval.
I'm not quite done with securing the stitches surrounding the steek, but now that I see that that method over here worked pretty well, just whip stitching, I'll probably continue up, and I'll be ready to steek this one soon as well. I think I do want to pick up my stitches first though, just so that I have that good boundary. So I'll be back when I'm ready to do that. As long as I still had this second row of securing the stitches to go, I thought I might give you a little look at how I'm doing that. So I'm going to be picking up a stitch from this column, well, half a stitch from that column, half a stitch from that column, leaving this center column right there for where I'm going to cut. I'll do a few more of these so you can see. So I'm just doing a simple little running whip stitch, making sure to catch one from each column. And try and hold it closer to the camera for you to see, possibly. See, I have a burgundy and a green on my little needle. Okay, I think you get the idea of that. So I'm going to continue up, and I'll be back when I'm ready to cut this third and last steek. Mainly what I wanted you to see now is as I go around the neck, that's the back of my neck. As I go around the neck and I come down the other side of the neck, coming down this side of the neck, it's much easier for me to see now that those steek lines are in place if I'm equally distant from the two pink vertical columns I've created. So I've gone back and forth with this a couple of times to get it to be hopefully in just the right place. And now I'll continue all the way down. So now that both armholes are open, steeped, this is still not able to lie flat, and I still don't really know how steep the V is going to be for the neckline. So what I've done is I've picked up the stitches that were on scrap yarn and picked up all the way around the neckline. I've secured 2 columns of stitches in this hot pink that I'm going to cut up through. And then it will be time to knit the ribbing. I knit the ribbing on the arm openings before I cut. I'm reluctant to do that here because I know I've got many hours of ribbing yet ahead of me. This is over 200 stitches around. So I want to really see that the shape of it is right. Not that there's anything I can do at this late date. The reason I did the ribbing first on the sleeves was I thought it would just hold everything in place better instead of having stuff wiggling around. But at this point, I think I'm ready to just cut and admire the beautiful shape that Susan Crawford has recreated from Jeannie Jarmson's original. In terms of picking up the stitches, there is a specified number. I know that I have too many, but when I make my first round, I'll knit stitches together to reduce that number, and I'll try and get it to have an even number of stitches from here to here. And this is my center mark. I'll try and have an even number of stitches from that center to where it meets the front of the neck. I also wanted to say, when I was picking up the stitches, it wasn't straightforward to just come down. I had to fudge a little bit here and there, because right in here are where I was decreasing in the pattern so that it will flare out and become a V-neck. So it wasn't a straight column is what I'm trying to say. All the time I wanted to pay attention to how much space I had on both sides of my pink columns. And I also wanted to make sure that the pattern over here was a mirror image of the pattern over here. I didn't want this to be over, like, you know, out here, and then this star is closer. So to show you what I'm talking about, let me just pull my needles together and you'll see that everything, it's not perfect, but more or less, these things are symmetrical around what will be the neckline. Of course, this will be way over here and this will be way over here, but I just thought visually they should be pairing up. So it's not perfect, but it's as close as I could get. I think those two are pretty good. And this one also, there's a little bit of burgundy peeking out, a little bit of burgundy peeking out. Same down here. I think it's going to be okay. I was concerned up here as well because the neckline wasn't exactly above this column. It was a little further out because there were only 8 stitches for the steek, whereas back here it was quite a few stitches. So it's not a one-to-one pairing, if you will. Okay, enough said. I am going to proceed with cutting the 3rd and final steek. Wish me luck. It's a little tricky. I'm looking out for pink, but there are some pink stitches that will need to get cut as opposed to the pink stitches that I've secured with. Oh boy, I feel like an old pro now, having done this twice before. There was method to my madness. I wanted to practice on the sleeves, but to do front and center, I wanted to not have that be my first ever attempt at steeking or cutting. This takes a lot of concentration. Don't do this if you have a bunch of kids running around deliriously laughing. Really want to concentrate and not snip in the wrong stitch. Wow, I'm not even halfway through yet. Yeah, all the people out there who are watching who are saying, what's the problem? I steek all the time. Yeah, have you done it with microscopically small stitches? There aren't that many people on Ravelry that I can discern who have knit a Jeannie. Maybe that's why. Moving right along. In the light zone, it's really tricky because everything looks pink there. That pink stitch I just cut through, that's pink. It's hot pink. Hooray for Fray check. My best friend. Courtney, are you watching? Are you proud of me? My coach. The person in our knit along who had finished her Jeannie before we even got started. Okay. This is the first time I am seeing how my neckline will be. It's interesting. I was waiting to see how this would look when it was all spread out and flat. Okay. Wow. Yay! I'm really happy. As you know, this was more than 4 months, about 4.5 months to arrive at this point. So I will return again to show you more after I've started working in the ribbing. These will fold back and the ribbing will go in from here. I'm probably not going to do as much ribbing now that I see it. I think this much ribbing is going to bring this in too far. We'll see. To be continued.